Hello and welcome to today's presentation. We're happy to be back with every one of you at LDN Property Management for our third session now. Since we talked about DLTs and blockchain technology in real estate during our last meeting, we are happy that you asked us to continue by focusing on the question of how smart contracts in the specific case of lease payments could potentially affect your current business model. Therefore, today we are going to start by having a quick look at what smart contracts are and how they work in general, before then applying them to the case of lease payments. After that, we will outline the major contingencies and focus in more detail on legality of smart contracts. Ultimately, we want to derive a recommendation on how you should position yourself to be ready for a future of DLTs and smart contracts within the commercial real estate industry. So, what are smart contracts? In simple terms, smart contracts can be understood as contracts from the physical world translated to software code and stored using distributed ledger technology, which we have discussed during our last session. While the physical contract is characterized by a human-object interaction, the smart contract is in its purest form an autonomous contract and follows an if-this, then-that logic. In terms of auditing, the physical contract is audited by semi-manual data collection, while the smart contract is audited in real time, and in most cases the audit is a built-in functionality as all related data flows are digitized within the distributed ledger. A simple example of a smart contract can be buying a bond. When you put money into a bond, you have to trust the entity that you give the money to that they will supply a certain amount of money when the bond matures. With a smart contract, you effectively do not have to trust the party to pay out because the software run by the smart contract will self-execute. Therefore, when the bond matures and all conditions are met, money will be transferred automatically via the smart contract. With this self-execution, the beauty of running a smart contract on a blockchain is that of immutability and it being distributed. Once a block is verified on the blockchain, once the contract terms are set and agreed to, it is entered as an effectively unchangeable block to the chain. No party can go back and edit the terms and conditions of a smart contract. It becomes therefore immutable. As blockchain requires a consensus mechanism to check the legitimacy of transactions with numerous nodes, the contract's validity is protected with this distribution among nodes. All conditions are checked to be met by the entire network, ensuring validity. In summary, contracts cannot be changed and their terms are legitimized by a distributed network and not just one central authority. Such contracts are entered onto the ledger by two or more parties. Oracles are used as a single point of truth for the contract to retrieve data external to the distributed ledger. For example, a contract may need a specific date and time as a prerequisite for execution, which will be provided by an oracle. Tokens, such as Bitcoin wallets or bank accounts, are also externally attached to contracts in order to move funds between them. This will take place depending on specifications within the contracts once they are executed. Regulators, as shown by the eye, can inspect the ledger to get a holistic overview. So far, we have described the infrastructure a smart contract is embedded in, while we have neglected the building blocks of smart contracts themselves. They can be understood as the architecture of implementation of smart contracts. The critical components of smart contract are the contract managers, which are operating on a ledger that stores the contract. Users interact with contract managers to create, sign, evaluate, and execute contracts. The managers ensure that the contracts can work or evaluate them using the contract evaluator. The contract evaluator could, for instance, be created by regulators to evaluate contracts in accordance with legally binding semantics. Both contract evaluator and contract manager require a contract engine in order to work on a ledger. If we look at the contract manager as being a certain word or a semantic, the contract engine can be understood as the alphabet. Thereby, the engine has to fulfill certain conditions, such as Turing completeness, but at this point, what we want to achieve is a basic understanding of how smart contracts work without boring you too much with more detailed technicalities. Having clarified the basic functionality of smart contracts, we can have a look at the specific case of lease agreements, which you asked us to evaluate. Here you can see a visualization of how tenancy contracts and the respective cash flows in the context of tenancy contracts are operated currently. Right now, your company operates as the intermediary between the property owner and the tenant. Property managers, such as yourself, ensure that tenants are following the terms of the lease while collecting payments, taking a fee off the top, paying contractors for maintenance costs, and passing profits to the property owner. You may also collect the security deposit and return it after deducting any repair costs at the end of the tenancy. In the external environment, there is a land registry providing proof of ownership, all while under the regulations put in place by the property's jurisdiction. But what will happen if we introduce the concept of smart contracts? As we can see here, the application of smart contracts is able to provide the same functionalities as your company when it comes to the management of cash flows. Therefore, the disruptive potential of smart contracts may have far-reaching consequences for you. With smart contracts, there is theoretically no need for property management companies such as yours. With the aforementioned affordances of smart contracts in mind, the tenant and property owner can manage the lease agreement independently using smart contracts. The smart contract will automatically pay out the periodical lease payments to the property owner and can be coded to automatically pay maintenance costs. It must be stated that the value of smart contracts is not just the affordance of automated cash flows, immutability and decentralization of the contract itself, but also entering into the agreement is much more frictionless. There is no need for the property owner and prospective tenant to include lawyers and other notary publics to ensure certain contractual contingencies. A basic use case outlining the benefit would be the programmable option that the smart contract may deny tenant access to the property after repeatedly not paying out rent. Of course, in such a future scenario, we have to assume a digitally controlled access mechanism to the property. Even though this structure is helpful to understand the disruptive nature of smart contracts in your line of business, it is misleading in a sense, because smart contracts are based on distributed ledgers, which is not shown in this representation. If we now present the above outlined changes to your field of business in the logic of distributed ledgers, we get a different picture that further clarifies the far-reaching potential changes. As you can see, every actor from the prior slide is now one node within the network. All the nodes in such a network are equal to each other, and everybody is storing one copy of the shared ledger. The shared ledger stores all the transactions, which were symbolized with arrows in the previous slide. As the ledger is only relevant to actors which are involved in the lease agreement, the ledger should ideally be permission-based and therefore a private one. A public and thus permission-less ledger would also be conceivable, but this has far-reaching consequences with regards to privacy and confidentiality, which we will discuss in more detail later on. However, there are already technical solutions to increase privacy and confidentiality on a public blockchain with the help of so-called distributed secure vaults, which are basically permission-based vaults within a public blockchain. But for now, a private blockchain is the most feasible prognosis in this context. Interestingly, a proof of concept already exists, the startup Medasium. It was founded in the UK in 2015 by Michael Smolensky and is based on an alternative chain. It is managed by a consortium of accredited business entities that comply with the built-in protocol of the network, while the entry is controlled by Medasium. The startup acts as a gatekeeper by identifying and authorizing participants in order to use the system, making it a permissioned blockchain. Although initiatives like Medasium show that efforts to move the commercial real estate industry to a distributed ledger technology and implement smart contracts are being made, there are still important contingencies limiting current possibilities. They include, for example, the necessity for an oracle, which would make real-time data of a land register accessible to the DLT. Additionally, security concerns have to be considered when applying smart contracts, since adequate encryption is necessary to limit the visibility of the smart contract's contents to the blockchain members involved in the contract itself. Furthermore, there are several legal concerns based on the current legal system, which we want to talk about in more detail due to their importance throughout the next couple of slides. But all in all, it needs to be noted that smart contracts can only be applied if all relevant parties mentioned throughout our presentation are willing to adopt this new technology. Now, let us have a look at why the legal concerns are currently such an important issue. First of all, we have to address the question if smart contracts are actually legally binding. To understand that, we need to be aware of some of the key requirements for contracts in the traditional sense to be legally binding, such as offer and acceptance, consideration, intention, and certainty. If we look at offer and acceptance in the context of smart contracts, for example, there is currently no commonly agreed upon method to define their occurrence. Another problem arises from legal intention due to the fact that smart contracts are written in software code. Therefore, it is difficult to judge whether or not they achieve an accurate representation of the involved parties' intentions. However, as you can see, there is an overlap between smart contracts and legally binding contracts. To better understand this overlap, we need to distinguish between operational and non-operational clauses. Operational clauses generally embed some form of conditional logic, meaning that upon the occurrence of a specific event, a deterministic action is required. Therefore, while the operational clauses as part of contracts are capable of being expressed in Boolean logic, the non-operational clauses cannot, as they relate to the wider legal relationship between the parties involved. Thus, at the current state, only operational clauses can be translated to smart contracts with legal certainty. In addition, a legally binding contract requires contractual capacity, meaning, for example, that the involved parties are of age. This, however, cannot be judged with certainty if a digital and potentially anonymous identity is used to enter into a smart contract. Furthermore, smart contracts are technically able to enter the involved parties into follow-on contracts automatically. This, again, raises the question of accountability as well as enforceability, which can hardly be answered under currently established law. As you can see, there are several such legal problems, mainly due to the fact that laws currently in place will need to be adjusted to account for the peculiarities of smart contracts in contrast to contracts in the traditional sense. On top of that, there are also technical limitations, such as immutability or the reliance on software code, which raises the question of accountability in the case of faultily written smart contracts. Additionally, incorporating external information proves difficult from a technical standpoint. If, for example, every node of the blockchain aims to source the external information, congruency cannot be guaranteed, corrupting the blockchain. If, however, an oracle is used as a single feed of external information to the blockchain, a single point of truth is introduced, defeating the main purpose of a decentralized and distributed ledger. Taking these limitations into account and carefully weighing them against the potential benefits of smart contracts, we have come to the following conclusion. Using smart contracts in lease agreements offers the opportunity to lower contracting, enforcement, transaction and compliance costs. At the same time, they can increase transparency and trust. Looking at the example of Medasium tells us that movements towards actual applications are currently taking place, which could potentially disrupt your current business model. However, as we have seen, there are still significant contingencies withholding large-scale implementation, which we do not expect to be resolved within the near future. This is especially true for the aforementioned legal concerns as well as the move of governmental land register to a DLT. Additionally, regarding the security concerns mentioned, we believe that the use of smart contracts within the commercial real estate industry is at the moment only feasible on a permissioned DLT, which we have explained in detail during our last meeting. While we believe that the resolution of the prevailing contingencies will not take place within the near future, it is our strong recommendation that you aim to start building the required expertise now in order for you to become the regulatory authority of the required permission DLT. While this significantly disrupts your current business model, it secures your existence beyond the implementation of DLTs and smart contracts within the commercial real estate industry. Although we obviously cannot name an exact time frame, many influential sources predict that we are still decades away from a large-scale adoption of smart contracts. With that being said, we would like to thank you very much for your time and attention. We appreciate you trusting us with the evaluation of this topic very much, and we hope to have given you a better understanding of how smart contracts could potentially be implemented within the commercial real estate industry and what that might mean for your organization. As always, we will be more than happy to continue our fruitful relationship and are happy to assist you in evaluating the potential impacts of emerging technologies.